Hey, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm Daniel. This is Nate. And in today's episode, we are talking about how to onboard, coach, and retain great teachers. One of the perennial pieces of advice in business is that if you're going to scale, you need other people. And if you need other people to help you build that business with you, it makes sense that there's some sort of great training process in place. And what I've always found is that great training process starts from the moment that they're hired and even how you bring them into the business. And we were contemplating this because we had received a question from one of our listeners about how Brooklyn Music Factory does the onboarding for their teachers. BMF has hired many, many teachers over the years and has refined and perfected, dare I say, how to onboard all this new staff coming in. And honestly, Nate, even a month, it's been about a month since we were there at the Founders Forum event in Brooklyn with all those great music school owners. I even met some new teachers that were new from the last time that I'd been in Brooklyn last March. And I don't say this with any kind of hyperbole or anything like that, but they already felt like they were well integrated into your machine. And I know from personal experience in onboarding people for Piano Express at grouplessons.com, for Grow Your Music Studio, and even onboarding our summer camp staff back when Greg and I used to run summer camps every summer, sometimes 12 weeks of summer camp every year. I know that doesn't happen by accident. And so what I want to do today, Nate, is kind of do such a cliche phrase, but I want to do a deep dive into BMF's onboarding experience. And I might even have some things to add from my own battles over the years of onboarding staff members or team members in the various businesses that I run. So you ready to jump into it?
Yeah, always ready. And I love that last comment you made, Daniel. It's like, I think of the onboarding and all of the steps we need to take to bring a teacher in, serving multiple purposes, but most importantly, what you were feeling, which is they feel encultured and integrated into our community. And you want to be able to do that as quickly as possible. So I love that you were feeling that with some of our new awesome teachers that have come on to BMF.
Yeah, it's a genuine comment. So let me start with a really important question. Why, and you were already alluding to it here, but why is it important to have an onboarding checklist for staff?
Yeah, I think the key with this is just to remember that at each stage of growth in our music school, Daniel, we have different needs. And when we are a small school with maybe one or two teachers on our staff, we can sort of remember basically everything that they're supposed to know. And most of the sort of onboarding and training and that kind of thing can happen in a more casual way through maybe just observing one another work, talking at the coffee station, and basically just like hanging out together and sharing ideas. But as our school grows and you get to a place like BMF and you have between 10 and 20 teachers, sometimes as many as 30, depending on the season, that onboarding checklist becomes essential because basically things just start falling through the cracks. All of the details that are necessary for any new teacher to come on board and feel comfortable working in your school, all those details, they're just way too many to handle when you're 30Xing it, when you have 30 teachers or 20 teachers. So that onboarding checklist, if for no other reason, needs to start getting developed in your school is so that you don't have to fret about all the things that you might have forgotten to share with that new teacher.
And I know later in the episode, we're going to actually start talking about what some of those things are. And I know that's going to be helpful for people as they evaluate the results they're getting with their team, or maybe retention problems they have with teachers. Like,
Yes.
oh, maybe this is why teachers only stick around here for 9 months to 15 months.
Yes, totally. Because that, and honestly, Daniel, that's exactly how we measure it. We measure in teacher retention. And of course, there's some things outside of our sphere of control. We just had a teacher leave because his mom is sick and he needs to take care of her.
Yeah.
So that's completely normal. Like, you want to actually give them your blessing and support them in their transition to that leaving the school. But in general, you want to know that your teachers are going to stay for a predictable amount of time. And that onboarding checklist is really your first impression with them. And first impressions with your new hire is everything. Like that first 2 to 4 weeks can make or break your teacher retention.
I will say this, that the challenge that some school owners face when they hear an episode like this, or they hear content like this, is, oh, well, I've got a problem now. I don't have time to build out this massive system. How do I fix my retention? What's the hack? So there can be a challenge in understanding how something like an onboarding checklist here will increase your retention from your teachers staying on average from 1 to 2 years to maybe 5 to 6 years. But one of the pieces of advice a mentor gave me all the time was, Daniel, you can either pull weeds for the rest of your life, or you can grow healthy grass. Because healthy grass chokes out weeds. It doesn't even allow them to go in there. And there is something satisfying about pulling a weed. And there is something more challenging about growing a healthy lawn. To use a horticultural analogy, which of all the analogies I should not be doing because I am not an outdoors person, right. But it does make sense to me.
Right, totally. Like my dad used to pay me a penny a weed to weed the driveway or something like that. And I just thought, like, yeah, it's like one dopamine hit after the other.
Yes.
And I think as school owners, we have to be so careful that we're not looking for those types of dopamine hits.
Yeah,
where it's just like a bunch of fires and you turn out to be the fixer.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and I'll just say this, everyone complains about having to firefight, but I think deep down, some people actually enjoy it because it feels like they're being productive. Look, the reason I know this, I'm not judging anyone. The reason I know this is because I'm looking at myself when I say that. Yeah. When things are challenging, when there is a very difficult challenge, and I'm thinking of certain clients of mine right now, when there is a difficult challenge, it can be tough to really dig in and say, like, this is a campaign. This isn't a battle. This is a 6-month campaign of a lot of small battles, a lot of work that I have to do to fix this major area in my school. And sometimes it's just easier to be like, oh, let me answer some emails. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, I will tell you, Nate, how I knew it was time to start an onboarding checklist in my businesses and our summer camp and all that sort of thing. And then I'd love to hear what your experiences were at BMF that got you to the place where you knew it was time. For me, It was very practical. As I was first starting to really grow a team, I'll just say within Grow Your Music Studio, we had a team member coming on, and just the timing of this hire happened to be right when I was going on a 2-week vacation out of town. And I already had an onboarding checklist, but me and my operations head at the time, Alicia, we were like, we really got to fill this thing out, because essentially we need to make sure that this person knows every detail about what their job is, how we work around here, how to submit their hours, how to work with us, what they'll be expected to do in terms of our project management system. We've got to make sure they understand how to do it. They got to understand who to reach out to if they have a problem. And so we just went through and we had this training set up that we paid them to go through, so they just even knew how to work. And to maybe get back to a little bit of why this is so important, the outcome of that was, this was so robust for this person that we basically didn't hear from them. And so then we got a little concerned. We're like, hey, is everything okay? They're like, no, I've got it. Like, I understand everything. And then even within the next, by the way, this was, going on a decade ago. Well, maybe more like 7 years, 7 to 8 years. But the next couple people that we hired, one of them literally said to us, I don't know if I have worked for a more organized company.
Yes.
And we were small. at the time, comparatively to now, but we were small at the time, and they had worked for like real estate offices. They were kind of more in an administrative position, and they had worked in various business types, and they were very type A, very organized. And so we just kind of looked at each other as a team who were already in the business, saying like, good for us, good job, good job us. So we knew we needed an onboarding checklist because we wanted people to feel comfortable coming on. We didn't want to be doing a bunch of manual question answering ourselves. And it was more proactive for us. It really wasn't us reacting to a bunch of disasters that happened. It really was just more proactivity and really thinking through, well, what would we want to know? So that's kind of, and we knew we were in a growth mode. So that's kind of how we knew we needed an onboarding checklist. What about you, Nate? Similar story or different?
I think, first of all, I love what you just said, where when you get validated by your efforts, when a teacher or a staff member says, I've never worked at a more organized company. First of all, whenever someone writes that at BMF or shares that with me, I'm always a little bit shocked because, like, I'm the creator, I'm the improviser, I'm the guy who goes away for a month and comes back and is like, here's the next level of the curriculum. I'm not the organizer and the systemizer for everything in our business. So every time that we hear that from a teacher, I just think this is incredible that we've built a team and an organization that where people feel supported and that they feel like we're the most organized place they've ever worked. I'm just like, that's amazing to me. So I love that quote. That's basically, for all of our listeners, what you're hoping you'll start to hear if you don't treat this as a fire, but instead, or a battle, as you put it, but instead you treat it as a campaign. Right? This isn't a 2 to 4 weeker and you're done. This is give it 1 to 3 years. Each year you're going to get better at it. It's going to get refined. And then you're going to find that you start getting these compliments more and more often. And for us, to answer your question, it became super clear to us as we started to add more and more teachers, and we found ourselves apologizing more and more. We're like, so sorry you didn't know that. Yeah. So sorry. Oh, man, wait, your paycheck wasn't right. Oh, that's because you were supposed to do this. Wait, we never told you about that? Like we didn't tell you about reporting your hours, or, we just kept explaining the policy to them and realizing that we never really trained them on the time off policy or the number of days that they were allowed in any given year to take. All these little, the minutia, right? And essentially for us, it just was like, it sucks to be constantly feeling like you're dropping the ball in one area of your company while thriving in the classroom teaching students, right? Like you feel so good with the delivery on promise, and you feel so bad in bucket number 3 with how you're operating the people and the money. So so really for us, I think it was just like, we need to get organized ASAP, because nobody likes to be saying they're sorry every day, Monday
every
through Friday.
Day. Yes. And as an owner, you do feel guilty when you feel like you've let your team down or when you're not doing your job well,
Yeah, totally. And let's be honest, all of us got into this because we loved to serve our students. So basically, the one area that you're probably going to spend most of your attention on is what happens in the classroom or at the recital, on the gig. But there's all these other facets to your company for a teacher to feel really well supported.
Well, Nate, it sounds like that's one thing that you based your onboarding checklist on. Is there anything else that you based your onboarding checklist on? Was there knowledge that you received somewhere else? Did you read something in a book somewhere, watch a YouTube video? I'm curious, how did you come up with this other than just reacting to issues that came up within the school?
Yeah. So you and I have talked about this some, and it's in many ways what we've designed in the Founders Forum is some sort of organizational leadership training, team building training. And this is the kind of thing, that at one point my partner and I were like, we need to go get help. And so we did. And we spent 2 years in a mastermind that was incredibly beneficial to us. And they spent a quarter every year just on how to develop team. And one aspect of that team was just understanding that you're not talking about people, you're talking about roles and responsibilities.
Right.
And every role has its own little micro checklist of how to succeed. So therefore, when we're making an onboarding checklist in this episode, we're just talking about that teaching role. But when we started looking at our org chart, we were like, oh, wait, right now, my name is in all these different roles on the org chart. So therefore, we don't need any kind of checklist, because basically I'm just self-onboarding and self-checking myself and learning how to do whatever job it is that, payroll or scheduling or communicating with families, et cetera. But as we start to remove ourselves from those roles in our school, that's when that checklist becomes essential. So one of the key components that we were trained on was just this idea that, hey, every role has its own responsibility, and therefore every role needs its own onboarding checklist that's pretty specific, right? We spent a lot of our early years figuring out the checklist, really just being like, what are all the questions we're getting from our teachers? Compiling a list of questions, like things like, both questions and complaints. Like we heard over and over things like, we never know when the next, we don't know what's supposed to happen 3 months from now. So I always feel surprised, right? We didn't know the gig was actually that date but I already have something scheduled. So, or I don't exactly know when I get paid. I just know that it happens every 2 weeks or every month. Like, who do I talk to take time off? Like, can I, do I get keys to the school? Like, can I use the studio when I'm not, like all these questions get compiled. And so it's a combination of both training, i.e., a community like, we put together in the forum where we're learning from one another and we're having deep conversations around what it means to onboard and support, but it's also just really listening. It's being like, I'm going to write down in my Evernote every question I get. I'm not going to just write down the times when I'm interested. I'm not just going to write down the times when I'm annoyed. I'm just going to make it a process.
Sure. I love that. I'm going to give two answers to this question that I posed myself. So my question for you was, what did you base it on?
Love it.
I'm going to echo, but also enhance. You said that you guys went through this 2-year training or 2-year process. I, too, went outside and I hired a coach specifically around hiring and managing team.
Oh, nice.
This was back in like 2016, 2017, because this was an area where I was really beginning to get fascinated about, because I was really thinking about scale at this time. I had spent the last 5 years of my life at this point just with my head buried in marketing books and trainings and courses and coachings and sales and all this sort of thing. And I was like, you know what? I'm kind of getting bored of reading and learning on this topic. What else is there in business to learn about,
Right.
Now, what's interesting is that I'd already kind of scaled our summer camp to some degree, but I was so young and dumb that I just was like, well, let's just do that. Not realizing there was this vast library of literature on that topic, and so we kind of just made up the rules on our own. Me and Greg did in our summer camp. But I actually sought out someone because I was thinking I really want to do this right. And so they gave me basically a template, and they said, now, of course, you'll need to add to this for the particularities of your organization. But it was helpful just to see that there. And I would say that, Google's probably your friend on this point. You could probably Google this, spend a half hour, and come up with a pretty decent template, so to speak. But to have someone show you and teach you and give you the whys and what's behind it, that was really helpful for me. So it's why I always, if I feel deficient in an area, whether it's in my personal or professional life, I will always go hire a coach and just do that. It's almost it is second nature to me now. Like, it's a thoughtless thing. I'd rather just spend the money than have to figure it out on my own. And I would just say that, Nate, like we're going to get into BMS checklists somewhat, but we're teaching this in depth in the forum. And so, in this year-long program that we're doing with folks, with a lot of school owners, including some massive schools. So if you have more interest in examining or exploring in depth what BMF does, we're obviously going to get into it here, kind of give the general template, but Nate's teaching this in depth inside the forum. Just go to growingmusicstudio.com/forum. And when we open it again, we'll let you know that it's open. Doesn't mean you have to join, just means that you're going to be kept up to date on all these opportunities to shave years, perhaps even a decade of time off of your development. If I really think about, if I could have just gotten what we're teaching in the forum in one package, it would have just saved me so much time. The second tip is as your team goes through onboarding, we actually just onboarded a new person in the summer, and we put them through our full onboarding process. And at the end, I have a meeting with them. And prior to the meeting, I send a number of questions. And one of them was there anything confusing in onboarding? What seems out of date? What could you have used more clarification on? And then we do a follow-up meeting, or actually my operations manager does follow-up meetings, and she's looking at how they're interacting with the business as a whole and other team members, and trying to read between the lines. Oh, this person had this problem. Could we have avoided that problem if we had taught them this in onboarding? So we explicitly ask a team member throughout the process and right after they onboard. But then we also look at any problems they have and just do this higher level thinking and think, could an onboarding step have prevented them from running into this issue? So that's another very practical way of thinking about that.
Yeah. I love that. That's like the it's a micro on our checklist, but Jessica does a 1 year in check-in with every new teacher and says, hey, just checking in to see what your experience is like, and et cetera. But what's fascinating is to hear where they're having issues and questions, because it's the way you frame that, Daniel, is perfect. Because you said something earlier where you were like, oh, we create the checklist and then you never have to think about it again. You're not hearing from the employee because it's running so tightly. I would say that's of course awesome. Like, you never want to hear from your employee about a paycheck, et cetera. You want it just to be humming, like they're always getting paid on time every time, things like that. But sometimes you don't hear from employees because you're not asking.
Yeah.
Right. So I like that. I like the way you frame that follow-up.
This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. Let me even give a micro hack here. We actually, in our project management system, we have an onboarding template. And when we onboard a new person, literally my operations manager goes through and there are so many subtasks on this thing. There's like main tasks, and then even under the main tasks, there's subtasks. And even go to the point. So what she does is she assigns all these tasks to the appropriate person. And so to prevent us from missing a meeting, essentially one of the tasks, so there's multiple meetings that are scheduled with this new team member to do follow-up. We assign it to them, And then right in the task, we put a link to the either my calendar or Bethany's calendar and say, book a meeting with us. And then once you do that, mark this task complete. So it makes sure that they're actually having these follow-up meetings. And then there might even be like a subtask on that says, send an email to Daniel and answer these 3 questions. And then an email gets sent to me so that I know what to talk about with them at the meeting. One of the things, especially as you scale a business up, you have so many things on your mind. It is so helpful to put the ball in the court of the team member so that they're pushing the demand to you versus you having to get in and like schedule 18 different meetings with all these different things. So 18 different people. And then what's lovely is I'll get this email and then I'll see when my meeting with them is, and then I'll just snooze it so it comes back up to me like 30 minutes before the meeting starts. So it's right there in my inbox. So it's just, I don't know, it's just these little attention to detail and how we set these projects up and thinking ahead about what are all the ways that we could actually drop the ball in onboarding and how can we put more pressure on the team member. And I will tell you, for them, I think this is why we get the feedback we get from the team members, because they just see, oh, like I literally have a task to set a meeting. Like this is why they say, like, this is why we get remarks from them about attention to detail, how thorough we are, how organized we are, because Bethany just goes through and assigns this whole project, or this whole task just like right when we start onboarding. And some of these tasks are months out and it's just living there on their task calendar.
Yeah, I love that. And we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because we're into the tactics on the actual onboarding checklist without talking about the overview of what goes on the onboarding checklist.
Yeah.
But I do love that because it's that whole notion of, are you trying to pull something out of your teachers, or are they actually pushing ideas towards you? Are they moving towards you? Like, we don't want to be in the position as owners of just creating a mass of humans that we're constantly trying to pull and get their attention. Right. Which I love that tactic.
So Nate, I think that is a good way to seg into what BMF actually has on the onboarding checklist for teachers. So maybe you can walk us through that a little bit. I know we only have so much time here, so you can't go into great detail like I was saying earlier, but maybe give us the overview of what's on there. And I think that people will get value out of this and even reevaluating how they're onboarding teachers.
Okay, love it. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just opening up our Asana. It's just an Asana template. That's just our project management. Jessica, who's our director of families and communication, who handles this part of our people power, she just makes a new template every time there's a new teacher hired. We're literally about to hire 2 new teachers right now, and she's just creating 2 new templates in Asana. So let me first read overview, and then let me talk a little bit about the why of each section. So she does it in steps. Step 1 is just a welcome and next steps with Jessica. And the step 2 is the first onboarding meeting and exactly what she covers in each one. Step 3 is training. This is sort of where most of us, our listeners, spend most of their time, is just what's actually going to happen with in the classroom. So we focus there, but we can't forget the other sections. And then step 4 is the ongoing check-ins, right? That's a little bit like what you were just describing, Daniel, of your having them book meetings with you. So again, step 1, just hello. Here's your next steps you can expect being a new hire here. Step 2 is the first onboarding meeting. It literally even has the agenda written out in it, everything from positive focus, which is the first thing we do, to covering our values at Book Music Factory, our 7 core values. That's the second thing we do. So the agenda is detailed there. Next, we go into the training section, step 3, and then step 4 is the ongoing check-ins. So in terms of what's on your onboarding checklist, I'm going to make it a little bit easier for us to understand, okay? The welcome is just like, hello, welcome to our school. So often people get hired and then just get thrown into a classroom. But there's no actual like, hello, here's who I am. Here's who the different characters are you're going to bump into at the school. Here's how we operate, our core values. Here is what your training schedule's like. Jessica literally just creates a nice looking PDF for them and emails it to them and says, here, and shows it to them in this Zoom check-in. Here's what your training is going to look like over the next, 1 month of your life. The next part is probably 10x more important than any one of our listeners are making it out to be, and that's the IT part. You have a Brooklyn Music Factory email address. Here's how to get into Slack. We only communicate in Slack. Here's how to use the scheduling software. All of the different IT parts of your business, which there are way more than you currently realize. I'm just telling you, listener. I promise you there's more. Like, what's the Google Drive like? How's it organized? What do you have access to and not have access to? All of these little details are essential. So an easy way to think about this part for our listeners is, imagine if you decided to go on a 3-day hike and you were dropped in the woods and you had no map, and all you knew was that you were supposed to arrive at this lake in 2 or 3 days, but you don't know how to get there. You have no idea who you're allowed to ask. Maybe you're given a walkie-talkie, but you don't know what frequency you're supposed to put it on. It's like your teacher needs to know, like, who to ask for what, how to ask, in what type of channel. When can I ask you a question in person? When should I send you a Slack or an email or whatever version you have? Am I allowed to text you? Am I not allowed to text you? All of these sort of IT things fall in there. Okay, so the third part of our onboarding checklist, just think of it as a connection time with department directors. So basically, let's say you've hired someone to work in your group class program. At Brooklyn Music Factory, we're a songwriting program. We may have hired this new teacher who's going to be in our mini keys and our Jam Band 101 program. They need to know that Sienna is currently our director of the exploration band department. She is actually who is going to be their main point person when it comes to questions about the curriculum and success and how to define success in their life in that department. It seems obvious to point out loud, but it needs to be said out loud, Daniel. Jessica is not the person to ask. Nate, the founder, is not the person to ask. Ben, the director of the private lesson department, is not the person to ask. Why? Because none of us three are truly qualified to help them in any consistent way, right? So that's that next part, is just understanding who their directors are going to be, if those exist in your school. It may be, if you're listening to this, that you're the person. In that case, you just want to break it down. You're like, you're going to have questions about our private lesson department. I'm going to be the one to talk to, and we'll talk about that in this type of meeting. You're going to have questions about, our group piano class or our songwriting class. I'm also going to be the person to ask, but we have a separate connect for that. Got it? And then the next chunk of your onboarding checklist is just literally around training. It's like, so you get a new teacher, they've joined, the exploration band department, and they need to know how they learn the curriculum. So it's, we have a whole virtual checklist that they go through. So they do asynchronous training through video training, and then they do a series of shadowing days, right? And by the way, it's the exact same for our camp. If you get hired to work at our songwriting camp, our summer camp, there's a training checklist for that, right? So you go through a day of shadowing at one of our day camps before you work our summer camp. So the training part is literally, how are you going to go from not knowing what success looks like and what to do in the classroom to knowing what success looks like, And so that's just a literal, like, here's when the meetings are, here's how many days you're shadowing, here's who you're shadowing with, blah, blah, blah. Finally, Jessica is running the people power team. She really is. She's called the Directors of Families and Communication, and she's at that center of the triangle of trust: student, teacher, parent. She's right at the center of that thing. So basically, any sort of operational question that they have, whether it's time off, et cetera, is all about the J team. So the J team sets up a series of check-ins as part of their onboarding. And just like you were saying, Daniel, like it'll be like a month out, and then it'll be she does a year out. I do a check-in with them. She has them book a check-in with me, which is like lunch with Nate within the first 3 months, something like that. So, but that's the last part of that onboarding checklist is like, when are they actually checking in with someone other than a department director or an in-class experience? So that's sort of the overview, right? It's not, the devil is in the details, as you put it, Daniel. So like our Asana has, like you said, 11-point checklist just for the IT part. We're not going to get into the weeds today, but it gives you a sense as a listener of thinking like, oh, I need to make sure I cover these main areas when I'm bringing on a brand new teacher. And just to say out loud what I said, 10 minutes earlier, which is most likely the only place we're thinking about is the in-classroom training. When in fact, we want to make sure that we're touching on all facets of the organization, the delivery on promise, the operations, people, and money as well.
Have you gotten any feedback from your team as to the rigor of what you just described there? Does it feel like too much, or is it just right?
This is a great question. You and I talk about this all the time, but I don't think a system is ever a set it and forget it. A system is always a living, breathing, and that sort of a document or a way to operate. And so we will, let me give you a concrete example of feedback we've gotten and ways we've iterated. It used to be that we didn't do asynchronous training before a teacher arrived. We did everything in person, one-on-one check-ins, and then shadowing and department meetings, right? And what we learned is that when you're stepping into a game-based songwriting program that is not traditional at all, like Brooklyn Music Factory, it can feel pretty radical for a teacher that may have grown up in a very traditional or a conservatory setting or something like that. And they walk in and they're like, hold on, wait, what? I'm supposed to just start playing in a drum circle? I don't play drums. Or, there's all sorts of questions that go into their, that may enter their mind. And so we created an asynchronous training that Jessica creates for the teacher and that they go through and check. They just literally check boxes and go through the whole thing, sort of as you were describing with your onboarding, Daniel, in terms of a series of tasks that Bethany might create for them. And that asynchronous training helps set them up much better for their first day at the factory when they're shadowing or when they're in the community room, et cetera. So that's an example of how we've iterated over the years. And I would just say, I would encourage all of our listeners to do what you and I talk about all the time, Daniel, which is don't get stuck, don't get paralyzed in analyzing this. Actually, and certainly don't treat this episode as like edutainment. Like, wouldn't it be great someday to have an onboarding checklist? Just literally write down, I am going to create an onboarding checklist this year. I'm going to do it in the next 3 months. And it may only be one task per bucket. Might just be like, here's how to email and communicate with me. Here's when to ask about payroll. Here's the one class you're going to shadow. And here's the one meeting a month that you're obligated to attend. Done. Make that the first checklist, right? Because I promise you that that thing's going to grow in detail and that thing's going to iterate over time. And we would be foolish to think that we could set and forget anything that we've built into our company. Instead, and we talk about this all the time in the forum because we're always, as a community, learning from one another how people are doing it in a slightly more refined way. You're always going to be learning. You're going to be learning from this podcast. You're going to be learning from fellow music school owners. You're going to be learning from your teachers. You're going to be learning from your next great admin hire who's going to be like, you know what? We could do this much more efficiently. And you're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to cut out these 4 onboarding steps because actually she just showed us how to do it in a much more efficient way for everybody.
I love that. Briefly, could you tell me how this checklist for onboarding improved things at BMF? Earlier, I spoke about some definite benefits that I saw. I got a little ahead of myself. I saw benefits that I saw as I did something similar, even before we knew each other, Nate, years before we knew each other. I'm wondering what benefits you've seen, if you could kind of just list them off in checklist fashion.
I mean, I think as a founder, the greatest benefit is that you feel you don't feel like you're getting poked 1,000 times a day or a week with questions, comments, concerns. Instead, you're observing that the team of teachers and the team of staff are actually operating and connecting and communing and doing the thing you hoped you'd spend your time doing, serving students, instead of having to spend all your time answering questions. The second thing that the onboarding checklist does is that we are in a unique position as founders, Daniel, which is that we're the initial creators. Like when you went back to your solopreneur stage of launching Grow, and you're just studying marketing and sales and all these things, and you were very much in the solopreneur stage. And then eventually you brought some people on, and as you were scaling and growing, you had to move into a place where you couldn't be the one who designed and decided everything. And so the onboarding checklist is a moment in time for you as a founder, and I feel this very acutely at Brooklyn Music Factory, where we've sculpted something, we've made decisions, and now we've handed it off to the organization, saying, you know what? May not be the absolute best way to do things, but this is going to be the way we do them for now. And I'm going to release my hold and my grip on the decision making at every stage of this company. And I'm just going to say, as far as training goes, of course, there's always going to be questions, but we think that this is the best way we can do it right now. So here's an onboarding checklist. I'm delegating it to Jessica in this case to hand off to the teachers, set up a shadowing schedule, give them all the asynchronous training, etc. And you know who isn't thinking about it? Nate. And that is one of the hugest benefits to you, is that you have to go from designer and decider to just being the person who says, I'm trusting and delegating. Because remember, there's a clear difference, Daniel, between being a decider and a delegator. A decider means everyone comes back to you and always asks, is this good enough? How is it going? Are you okay with this, Nate? Are you okay with this, music school owner, founder? But a delegator says, we've built this thing, hopefully collaboratively with your team. We think it's the best we can do right now, and I trust that it's working. You don't need to come back to me and ask, is this the best onboarding checklist ever? What are we missing? I don't need to know. I trust. And that's the delegation process. And there's a very, very noticeable difference between constantly decision-making as an owner versus regularly delegating as an owner.